Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming here, of course, virtually and in person. We're here to basically hear what I think will be a lively conversation on a topic that's not really well known in relating to eliminating chemicals and water stewardship. And so with us today, we have two environmental leaders that will show us how they've navigated the diverse water stewardship initiatives in Connecticut. And that extends both to restoring and protecting our vast water systems, but also as that relates to the health of our land and by extension, wildlife. So there's an important variance of topics to discuss. And starting with Ann Hulick, she is with Clean Water Action and Clean Water Fund. She's the state director of the fund. There's actually 19 offices around the nation, and she heads up our state. And after her, we'll have Kristia Janowski, and she heads up sustainability and educational programming for Mill River Park Collaborative, a very exciting project. So with that being said, I think we'll just turn it over now to Ann, and welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to meet you all, to see you. I'm so sorry I can't, excuse me, be there in person. But it is a real honor to meet with you all today and talk to you about water stewardship and emerging contaminants and how we can all be stewards of our water and our environment. And I look forward to working with you on all of these issues that we deeply care about. So as Lisa said, my name is Ann. I'm the Connecticut Director of Clean Water Action. We are a national group based in DC, but with offices in 19 states across the country. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. Clean Water Action was the group that really pushed for and ultimately passed the Clean Water Act. And so our mission has been consistently to improve the Clean Water Act and to make sure that we are complying with the Clean Water Act and not weakening the strength of that law. We also have expanded into other areas that impact our waters, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So next slide. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly, kind of on a high level, and then I'm so eager to hear Kristia's work. Our work at the state level, as I said, is really focused on water policy, making sure that we are doing more to protect our waters and conserve our waters. And in Connecticut, we are really blessed, honestly. I think you all know this, that we have an abundant sources of water. We are on top of enormous aquifers that feed groundwater sources and ultimately lakes and our beautiful rivers. We have 450,000 acres of wetlands. You can see 6,000 miles of streams and rivers, numerous lakes and reservoirs, from which we get our drinking water sources, and over 600 square miles of estuarine water on the Long Island Sound. So we're really, really fortunate. And I think in many ways, that's a blessing. It's also been a little bit of a curse in that we don't always take our water for granted. We take our water for granted at some times. And I think it's really important, this topic today, because things are changing and we need to pay attention to that. And we all have a role to play. So next slide. So our water generally comes from, as I said, large aquifers, major water systems, all the way coming from Canada down to Long Island Sound. Next slide. So this is just a map of our watershed areas. So you can see it's all color-coded with the major watershed areas in our state. We are fortunate in Connecticut that, one back, please.
All right.
That's okay. that we do have very strong laws to protect the land around our watersheds. And as a result, we have very good drinking water standards and drinking water in our state. So our major watersheds are classed at class 1, class 2, and class 3. And the basic around that is just class 1 is the area of the land closest to the water supply. Class 2 moves out a little bit, 150 feet of the water supply, and class 3 is the rest of the water utilities land. We have about 2,500 public utility systems in our state for drinking water, and the public utilities that own the land where we get our drinking water. We have these large areas of land. Excuse me, let's turn off my phone. Sorry about that. That protect, filter, and take out toxins so that we do have good drinking water supplies. I shared with you the statute 22A 417, if anyone is interested. This is the law that prohibits any sewage discharge within the entire watershed. And that's a key component of what makes Connecticut's drinking water supplies pretty well protected, frankly. So we should be proud of that. Not every state protects that amount of watershed land. So next slide. We also have in the state, we did pass a state water plan in 2019. And I wanted to share this with you because the work of the State Water Planning Council is ongoing and continues. And it's really a robust group with the State Water Planning Council and then many subgroups working on the various issues that we are facing with respect to our water. The water plan was adopted in 2019, as I said, and the goal of the plan is to balance the needs of the public with respect to our water supply, with economic development, recreation, and ecological health. And so there are various subgroups for the State Water Planning Council, which all of which strive to do education, make sure that we're implementing the plan, make sure that we are doing a better job of monitoring drought and taking measures to address drought. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And to think about how do we address and remediate emerging contaminants, which I will also talk about. Things that are threatening to our water supply, not just drinking water supply, but all of our waters. So next slide. So as I said, we can't take our water for granted. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, I kind of always did. We've always had, beautiful lakes to swim, fish, rivers to kayak. I turn on my tap, I always have water. I know my drinking water is safe, but our waters are under threat, and there's a number of reasons why. And this is why it's so important for us to be aware of these threats so that we can think about what can we do. So one of the threats right now is, and has been for a while, is rollback of the Clean Water Rule. The Clean Water Rule is the regulation that all of the components of regulating under the Clean Water Act. And for years, there have been numerous attempts to roll back the protections afforded by the Clean Water Act. And there's been big debates, you may know all of this, there's been big debates about which water bodies are covered under the Clean Water Act. And that becomes problematic because if we don't have clear definitions of which waters are protected under the law, there's a lot of opportunities, and there have been a lot of devastation to important waters including wetlands and other areas that impact people downstream and impact our ecological health. So that is an issue going on right now. We are constantly working on that. The next issue is climate change. And I will talk about all of these in more detail, but definitely an issue that we are feeling in Connecticut and that is impacting our waters right now. Stormwater runoff is also a big issue in Connecticut, as it is in many states, but you all know we have a lot of pavement, a lot of impervious surfaces. All of the time that we have rain, all of those chemicals and metals and things that are on our roads wash into sewers and ultimately get into our water bodies. So in Connecticut, stormwater runoff is a big source of contamination to our rivers and ultimately Long Island Sound. Much of stormwater runoff can also contain phosphorus and pesticides and fertilizers, which you all know are chemicals that also impact not only the pH of our waters, but also have toxic chemicals in contaminating our waters. We do have a bit of a problem with de-icing materials used in the winter. Although Connecticut, we didn't use much this winter, but that has been a problem over the past few years. The materials that are used to keep our roads safe and melt ice do contain magnesium and salts that get into our waters. And that is a concern, something we need to constantly monitor. And the big issue that I have been working on for the last 4 or 5 years are emerging contaminants. And the biggest one that we've been focusing on are PFAS chemicals. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm sure you've all heard of that. And we can go to the next slide. So let's start off with climate change and what's happening in Connecticut right now. You're all aware of, I'm sure, that we have more frequent and intense storms, and those storms cause destruction of wetlands, shoreline erosion, more of that stormwater runoff, and flooding incidents, and also CSO events, which are, if you haven't heard of this is a big story in Hartford right now. These are combined sewage overflow events. And what happens is that we have combined sewers. These are old water pipes that were designed to, when there's flooding, to designed to overflow into this, allow overflow of sewage, raw sewage from our pipes into the pipe that goes directly into rivers. So this was how pipes used to be designed, but now that we are having more flooding and more intense storms, we are seeing combined sewage overflows. And this, as I said, this has been a very recent issue in Hartford, which has been extraordinarily problematic. This has resulted in sewage backing up into people's homes in the north end of Hartford and actually making homes inhabitable. It is a crisis, and as you would expect, generally affects where people are disproportionately burdened by other sources of pollution. These often are in environmental justice communities, low-income communities, and it's a real problem. So go back one more. Yep. We're also seeing warmer temperatures. You'll remember last summer, one of the hottest summers on record. And when we have long periods of extreme temperatures, we see more of these algal blooms in our waterways. This is a result of not only warming temperatures, but phosphorus and nitrogen runoff from fertilizers and other sources. And that's combined, that results in these green-blue algal blooms. Some of them are not harmful necessarily to human health, but some of them evolve into cyanobacteria, which is harmful to human health, wildlife, fish, your pets, and we're seeing that more and more as the temperatures warm. We're seeing changing weather patterns. So in 2022, you all may remember, we had a statewide drought. All of our counties in Connecticut were in stage 2, pretty severe drought conditions for a very long time. That was really unprecedented. The southwestern portion of our state, where you all are, has experienced drought in 2020 as well as 2021. And we expect that we're going to see more drought periods for extended periods of time. So we really need to think about how do we, as each one of us, how do we conserve and protect our waters? And I just shared the link to where you can get information on the state water plan. And there is a drought subgroup that only works on these issues. So that is the link for more information and monitoring of our drought conditions. Next slide. I talked a little bit about stormwater runoff. You all know what that is, but it is in Connecticut a major source of pollution. And those, as I said, those heavy metals, those toxic chemicals from our roads, gasoline, all of those kinds of things wash into storm drains and out into our rivers. And we really need to do a better job with green infrastructure, with rain gardens, all of those kinds of things that can have a dramatic improvement on preventing or limiting stormwater runoff. So we can think about that in our communities. Next slide. So here's the issue that I want to spend a little bit more time on, because it is a huge issue in Connecticut, and we're going to hear more and more about this. I'm sure all of you have heard about PFAS chemicals. I can't see you all, but I'm happy to answer any questions, so just jump in. But PFAS chemicals are a class of about 12,000 different variations of chemicals, all of which are united by a common trait in that they have a fluorine-carbon bond. And that is a synthetic, man-made chemical bond that is very helpful in many products, but it is also harmful in the sense that it is the strongest bond known to man. These chemicals do not break down in the environment, and they're in our bodies, they get into wildlife, they're in our plants, and they're ubiquitous. They're very hard to remediate. They're in a number of different products. So firefighting foam, all of the things you see here, they're in cosmetics, in artificial turf, food packaging, Teflon pans. So anything that is anti-stick, anti-grease, stain resistant, wrinkle repellent, 24-hour makeup, all of those kinds of things likely have PFAS chemicals. The good thing in Connecticut is that we have, in 2021, we did ban the use of firefighting foam and switched to a non-fluorine-based firefighting foam that is effective and does not contaminate the environment like this one does. We also banned food packaging that contains PFAS chemicals. So we were one of the first states to do both of those, and I'm really proud of that effort. But we need to do more. These chemicals, as I said, once they get into our environment, they do not break down. They are mobile because they get into our water, our soil, our groundwater, and they move around. So we know that across the country, it's estimated that over 200 million Americans have PFAS in drinking water sources. We know there's large plumes of PFAS contamination in groundwater and in soil, far away from the original source of the contamination. And it is a huge concern. In Connecticut, we are in the process now with our environmental agency and our Department of Public Health of mapping at-risk sites for PFAS, and there will be monitoring and remediation going forward across the state. There's right now, is what I know is there are 2,400 sites that have been identified as at risk, meaning it's likely that they have PFAS contamination. And we know that as DEEP, our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, goes out and tests all these sites, we're going to find PFAS. So we want to have people be aware, not be alarmed, but we all need to act. So next slide, please. So this is why I'm so concerned about PFAS chemicals and why there's a global concern about these chemicals. They are strongly linked to certain cancers, reproductive disorders, low birth weights, both weight and size of newborns, liver damage, high cholesterol, thyroid disruption, impaired immunity to vaccines in children, ulcerative colitis. And as I said, we're learning more and more about this, but the science is very clear that these health impacts from these chemicals are severe.
Anne?
Yes.
This is Lisa. Just from, I'm curious, a generational standpoint, when were these released approximately? Was it 70s?
Oh, good question, Lisa. So these chemicals were developed by DuPont and then subsequently 3M, which is a spinoff of DuPont. And they were developed in the 1940s and into the 50s. And I would just encourage all of you to watch the film, which I think you can stream now, called Dark Waters. And it tells the story of not only how these chemicals were developed and why they were developed, but how these industries knew about these health impacts, actually hid the research. And here we are today with global contamination. People are likening this to the worst oil spill ever across the globe. They're everywhere.
So it's not just America then? It's in Europe.
No. These chemicals are now found in very high levels in the Arctic. And there's currently a biomonitoring study going on in the most remote places in the Arctic with Native American children, because they rely on mammals and seals and fish for their food. They have very high levels of these chemicals in their blood. So they're all over the globe.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if I'm depressing. So this is what we can do. We can, as stewards of our waters, as residents of Connecticut, as smart, bright women that care about these issues, there's a number of things we can do. One of the things is we can use our purchase power to avoid buying products that contain toxic chemicals. We've done a lot of work pressuring big global retailers like REI, like Target, like Walmart, like Lowe's, to stop using PFAS in their products. And anything that you purchase, just be aware that if it's anti-stick, anti-stain, stain repellent carpeting, textiles, those things likely have PFAS, and you can make wiser choices. We can consider how to reduce our use of fertilizers and pesticides on our own lawns. These, as I said earlier, contribute significantly to algal blooms, and pesticides are toxic. They are toxic to pollinators and wildlife, and ultimately to us.
I have a question. Is
Yes.
the PFAS requirement for the drinkable water testing?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that too well.
For drinkable water, is there a requirement that the drinkable water is being tested for PFAS?
Absolutely, yes. Yes. Yeah, so we can consider ways to conserve our water. We can think about taking shorter showers, not, using perhaps rain barrels to capture water. We can think about water efficient faucets and shower heads. There's a number of things that we can do to conserve water. We can certainly be more mindful of not using water to water our lawns when there's times of drought, things like that. Just changing our own behaviors can make a big difference. We can think about opportunities for local actions and ordinances. Some towns think about, how do we reduce the use of pesticides or fertilizers on our lawns? Are there ways that we can expand green infrastructure in our communities? Things like that. And we can do more to, and I hope you'll all think about engaging with me on this. We need to do a much broader ban of PFAS chemicals, PFAS in products that turn off the tap of further contamination. So as an example, as I said, we did ban the firefighting foam, which was the largest source of PFAS contamination, and food packaging, which is a huge source of human exposure. But we need to do more. We need to restrict products that contain these chemicals, because ultimately they not only expose us, but they expose our environments. These chemicals off gas, they get into our homes, our air, our dust, and ultimately into our environment when they're at the end of life. So even if they're going to a landfill or an incinerator, those incineration and landfill processes do not break down these chemicals, and they end up getting into our environment, in which they stay there. So next legislative session in 2024, we are going to be pushing for a much broader ban of products that contain these chemicals. That is a significant way to turn off the tap, preventing more contamination from products where there's safer alternatives. There's other ways to have these products. We don't need toxic chemicals in products that harm health and our environment. So next slide, I think that is it. Yeah, and so thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I really appreciate your time and your interest in this topic, and I look forward very much to working with all of you in any way that you're interested.
I have a comment. So I'm Heather Burns, CEO of the Connecticut Sustainable Business Council. And Anne, I met you back in 2016.
I can't even believe it.
I know, right? And I just want to commend you and say that you're really one of my heroes. I mean, you've been working on this for so many years, working so hard to build alliances, to educate people. I mean, you should see Anne at the Capitol. She was meeting with legislators, and she just knows her stuff, and just incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have worked with you back then, and also just for the work that you've done on behalf of everyone. So thank you.
Oh, well, the feeling is very mutual, Heather. You and I have worked so long together, and you and I have talked about how to engage the business voice in this work. And I'll tell you, that is really, really powerful. I mean, when we're talking about shifting corporations like Walmart and Lowe's and Target, and now REI has committed to no longer using PFAS in their clothing. that's huge. So that is the business case. Consumers demand safe choices, and these corporations then become good partners, good stewards. So thank you, Heather, for your leadership.
I just have one more question with your reference with drought. Is there
Yes.
any one area, understandably geographically, that would be most likely to endure drought? Could it be the tail where we are, Fairfield County? Could it be northeast corner? Is there any orders that have more of a red alert, so to speak?
I would say no, not at this point. As I said, in a few years back, I don't know why, southwestern Connecticut, where you all are, did experience quite an extreme drought. You probably remember that.
Yes.
And the rest of the state was okay. But it really is just changing patterns of rainfall, snow, all of those sources that feed our groundwater and our drinking water sources. And last year was quite extreme. It actually extended beyond Connecticut up into Massachusetts, into Rhode Island. The whole northeast corridor of our 3 states was impacted by drought for a long time. So it is a concern. We know that we're going to experience more, longer periods of heat. And we also know that this year we have not had near as much snow or rain, so we're already behind. So there's a lot of concern about statewide drought again this year. But
Well,
yeah,
thank
good
you.
question, Lisa.
Regarding the PFAS, is there any way we can prevent and stop installing the artificial fields? This is affecting so many students and our children. And there's one field being just proposed in Greenwich in one of the schools. And this has to stop because we're basically contaminating huge areas, and disposing of it is going to be such a problem. Why we can't educate, and I don't know what to do. I'm just.
I could do a whole lecture on a whole talk on this topic. It is a huge issue, and I thank you for that question. Towns across the state are dealing with this. There's a fight in Stamford right now. There's a fight in Bloomfield. There's Madison. I mean, it's terrible. Not only are these fields toxic, they have very high degrees of heat. They have high levels of bacteria. They're made of plastic, so they're increasing our reliance on a fossil fuel-based plastic product, which those eventually lead to more microplastics in our water, which is a whole nother issue. I didn't even get into that. But in short, we are working with Mount Sinai, the Children's Environmental Health Center in New York, and we will be, I'm very pleased to say, conducting a study on exposure to these fields, a comprehensive study that hopefully will alter this trajectory of installation of these fields. But in the meantime, many towns, many citizens are trying to fight the installation of these fields. There is such significant research on the harms of these fields that you can, and I'm happy to help with this, you can try to educate residents in your community. The challenge is that oftentimes these decisions are made by athletic directors and parks and recs guys and schools that think these fields are better, better to allow more kids to play. And there's just a lot of false narratives out there. These fields are actually more costly in the end because once they're done at the end of life, which is 8 to 10 years, they have to be disposed of. And where do you think they go? They're hazardous waste. They have to be You know, it's costly to get rid of these fields, and that's a cost to the town. So I could go on and on. I'm sorry for ranting, but I can help you if you want to reach out. I'll try to help, but it is a tough fight.
Well, Anne, thank you for this presentation. You are just chock full of information. I'm going to see it again recorded, because we will
Thank you
record it.
so much. I appreciate it. And my contact information is there. Reach out if I can be helpful for anything.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And here we have Kristia, everyone, and she'll be coming on in a moment or two, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Kristia Janowski. I am the Director of Education and Sustainability at Mill River Collaborative. And as Lisa mentioned, just talking about a lot of the issues that are affecting the state overall and the region overall. I'm here today to kind of go over a case study of sorts with you, and hopefully share some positive views about things that can be done, positive stories. So I work at Mill River Park Collaborative in Stamford. And, so just to give you an idea of the space that we work in, the watershed, Mill River watershed starts up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, Lewisboro, New York. It empties into Stamford Harbor and covers 40 square miles. When it rains in Stamford, 75% of that water ends up in the Mill River watershed. It also is the home to 2 reservoirs, which are the city's drinking water. So we get our water from it. So to give you a little background on the river, Stamford was one of the first settlements in Connecticut, not the first, but one of the first settlements in Connecticut. And when the Europeans first came, the first thing that they built outside of their homes after their houses was a dam across the river. And that came with mills. There were several mills that stayed on the river for over, I guess they were active for about 250 years. The dam itself was there for around 300 years. They helped advance society in the city and across the state, actually up and down the eastern seaboard. As one of the mills was an ironworks that made the chassis for horse-drawn carriages, and was the largest producer of horse-drawn carriage chassis in North America, right up until the cars. So it was really a center of industry that helped kind of advance society in the Americas. However, the impact of that on the river was rather extreme. It said that from Long Island, they could tell what color they were dyeing the hats in the factories in Stamford, because they could see what color the water was in Long Island Sound coming out from the river. So for those of you who aren't from around here, that's quite a distance. And all of that was just being poured into the river, and with hats also comes mercury. So that presumably was going to the river as well. They put on the river 2 more dams further south and 7 more dams north of the section of the river that I currently work in today, and that I'm focusing on in this particular talk. One of those dams was the dam that holds the reservoir for the Stamford City drinking water. So that one we still need. When they put that on, it reduced the flow through the downtown area and kind of made the downtown water area stagnant during the summers, smelly. They didn't really like it. And in the early 1900s, 1922, time of building, and the solution to everything was build something. Let's build something. So they built channels on the river to fix the slow flow of the water. They put concrete walls on a section of the river that is a large city block length, and kind of cage the river in. Within 5 years, they realized that that was not a great idea because they started to see issues with it. So this is a picture of what the channels look like. Obviously not in 1922, but sometime in the early 2000s. The dams caused a lot of issues. And like I said, they didn't really work well. And when you have, as Anne spoke about, there's increased flooding events. With increased flooding, the water needs to have some place to go. You have concrete walls do not absorb water, obviously. So the water spilled out over the sides, and these are the walls with the water spilling over the sides. This was in 1955, but shortly after the walls went in, there were major issues with hurricanes that flooded the downtown area, ripping out the roads because of force of the water that came through the area and then had no place to go with these concrete walls. That energy spilled over the walls, out into the street, ripping up roads. With floods comes a lot of health issues, a lot of property damage. So 1938, 1955, 1978, 2007, all led to major flooding events that destroyed the downtown area, basically. And the city had to do something, obviously, but it took a long time for them to figure out what to do. Sorry. So just to give you some context, when I was in high school, can you guys see my mouse? I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right about here, I had to do a water quality sampling study for an environmental science class. And I dropped down this wall, probably right where that red car is, dropped down about 8 feet and landed in muck. That looked something like this, except that's nicer than what I landed in. What I landed in was orange and kind of green, and it bubbled at me, and it stunk, and it was kind of pussy. There was a bicycle, there was a shopping cart, there was a dumpster, there was a tire, and there was a whole bunch of other trash. There was no flowing or moving water. I took my little test tube and scooped up some water or muck, and scrambled back up that wall as quickly as I could to get out of it. But this is what the river looked like for most of my time in high school. There's traffic cones, I believe that's an oil drum in there or some sort of drum. There's a whole bunch of trash in the river. It was obviously not a great place. There was a lot of contaminant in the river. It was declared a brown site. And so this is actually during a restoration project. It was a really long process to get the money for the restoration and to go through the studies that have to be done to do a restoration. There were 2 dams that needed to be removed. The walls needed to be removed. The bottom needed to be taken out because it was a brown field. The riverbed needed to be regraded. It needed to be shaped into a natural river shape instead of just this straight channel. And rock veins needed to be added to it to encourage oxygen flow through the water, and native plants needed to be replanted. It took, I think that process started, we were talking about it earlier. I have a slide at the end that goes through the timeline, but they started kind of looking at how to fix the problem that they'd created more or less in the 70s. It went through Congress. It went through multiple studies. Congress finally approved it. Army Corps of Engineers came in and did this kind of amazing process, which I wish I had better pictures of. But in this picture, you can see they're rerouting the river. They're putting these metal walls that allow them to push the river behind these walls so they could work in the riverbed. Can't work in a riverbed if there's so they rerouted for this huge section that is like the size of a really long city block, and took the two dams out, that the one in the main section of the park and the one that's down at the mouth of the river, took the walls out and did all of this work. Eventually, so this is the dam at the harbor at the mouth of the river being taken out, and the river bed in the process of being pumped out of the water being pumped out of it. So with that restoration, after that restoration, it actually worked, and it took a really long time. It started in 2009 and went through 2013 for the actual work to be done on the river. But today we have a park that and a river that supports healthy ecosystem functions, provides habitat for animals, and also helps prevent flooding. Water needs a place to go, and the soils allow the water to be absorbed when we have higher flooding events, and they also retain water. The plants retain water, so they help with drought as well. One of the things that Anne mentioned was permeable surfaces and hardscapes. The concrete didn't absorb anything. It didn't hold any water. It just forced the water to go everywhere really quickly, and then it had to go. There was no retention of it. So restoring the banks to a natural state not only allows the water to flow in through the soil, but it also allows the plants to hold some of that water and to slowly release it over time, which helps prevent droughts. So you're preventing floods and droughts. I have in 2001, we had a, actually I just want to preface this by saying the 2007 flood was a 20-year flood incident, and it flooded the entire downtown area, and again caused damage to Washington Boulevard, the main freeway along there. This was a 100-year flood, and 2 weeks later we had a 500-year flood, and the restoration did its job. You can see how swollen the river is. Yeah, it came out of its banks, but it stayed within the walls of the park, even for a 500-year flood. It didn't leave the park. So this is a nature-based solution to a human problem, and it took decades to happen, and a lot of manpower, a lot of will, a lot of political might, a lot of money to get it done, but it works, and we have the proof of concept here. This is not a great slide because it's so light, but if you can see the mouse, there's this yellow line. This is where the original flood, what did I do? So this is where the original floodplain was. This is our downtown area in Stamford. It was projected to be moved into where this green line is, but it actually did better than that, as we saw in 2021. It stayed inside the more or less inside the boundaries of the river, the created riverbed, a little bit outside them, but not as far as they anticipated. So Anne spoke about a lot of things that are issues and problems with our water systems, and droughts and flooding and chemicals. One of the things that I like to focus on is that we as humans have the amazing capability to recognize when we've done something wrong and to correct it. It's not easy, but it's doable. And I work at a place and I love to talk about it every day. Because it is a positive thing and there's proof of it. There's proof that humans can correct our problems, our mistakes and all of the issues that we've caused. As long as we're persistent and keep at it. So. This I took yesterday and right here, where this little wooden post is across the river, is the same spot that I dropped down over 20 years ago to collect that oil, that oil sample, that water sample. This is what it looks like today. And I don't know if you can see in this picture, but there are baby geese right here. Oh. And there were ducks going over the waterfall. They just like to play in the waterfall. And all of this, all of these native plants, this native meadow here is what's protecting the town. So while we think about building new structures and development and expansion and growing our way of life, I think it's a really good lesson in thinking about considering nature in that and not working against our planet, but working with it. Because it knows what it needs. It knows better than we do. So we just have to remember to listen. Yeah. If anybody has any questions.
That's a great story.
Thank you. I like it. I think it's always a positive thing to have, you know, a good nature story.
So how much, do you know how much it costs in total?
I don't. I actually was asking that. I asked our director of development this morning, and I know that I have some slides here. So we did get we didn't, but city got a grant in 2001 to help with the Brown site, but that was just a drop in the bucket, 100,000. It was multi-million-dollar project. I mean, removing 2 dams and regrading the land. I mean, the cost alone of taking out brownfield and then disposing of it safely is enormous.
Is this a very forward-thinking method too, meaning like gain national prominence? Do you have to know?
I mean, there's
regional
dam removal and restoration is the way they went about it is not that unique, but I think at the time that it first came into, like, the plan first came up, the idea of doing it for flood prevention, I think was kind of a unique situation.
That was the 90s.
So, well, the original plan that called for a park was in 1927 or 28. But the master plan that kind of called for the park was in 2000. But I believe 1997 was when
the action took place.
was when they prepared, they did a study of the river and came up with that sort of plan for that. So it was all kind of around a 10-year study that the Army Corps of Engineers did.
Question.
Yeah.
I started with the water quality, and we were sampling it, and I discovered how bad it is. Then we didn't finish with the restoration, how the water quality. Do you still have the old sample, and can you compare it to the water quality
So I started in this position about 18 months ago, and we opened a new building. I oversee education. It's been very, very, very busy 18 months. That is on my list of things to do. I have not been able to dig that out yet. But because all of that's before, none of it's digital. So I have to go through like files and read all these hand typed reports. So I don't have the original water quality studies. I know that they exist. And I can put 2 and 2 together, and if it was a brownfield, they were bad. They were really bad in order to get that designation. So I would like to find them. That is on my to-do list for this next year. We do water quality tests now. And is it the most pristine water? No, but there really is no pristine water left.
Right, but
anywhere.
you can, prove
It's
how much
significantly
the
better.
process is
Yeah.
of the station, which is
Yep.
now becoming
It's-
this filtration mechanism.
Absolutely, and we have, as part of the restoration, they put in a bioswale. Which is the one we have in the park is an award-winning one, and it is a natural way of filtering out nutrients. The stormwater pipe comes into the park, like right from the street, and empties into an area that is separate from the river, and it's probably 75 to 100 feet in length. And it's a wetlands that is designed specifically to filter out the nutrients, the excess nutrients, and quite frankly, the trash. We're constantly picking trash out of that. Plants kind of catch it like a sieve, but the bacteria in that section help to break down the nutrients, but then when the water reaches the river, it's in a better state than it would be otherwise. Again, it's a natural base, a nature-based solution that if we put more of those in around our watersheds everywhere, it'd be huge.
The water as the discharge point, and then.
And then out, yeah, we do test the water in the river, and it is good. The oxygen levels are better, the nutrient levels are better. It's within healthy river water ranges.
Fish.
So yes, that's the other thing. We have
Fishing
we have
on the river.
alewives that have come back. We had a population of alewives that for 300 years were swimming at the mouth of the river on the other side of the dam, basically hitting their heads, trying to get back upstream to breed. Once the dams came out, the alewives have come back. They're breeding in there. We also have eels, which are on the threatened species list. And in the spring, you can go down to the river and sit at the water's edge, and for 10 minutes, if you sit there, you'll see at least 10 little elvers, which are baby eels, just swim by you. So